was the last time you saw an animal and thought, that's a new animal. I haven't seen that animal before. Since 1900, 568 different species have gone extinct. That's 53 times the evolutionary average. So the question is, what is the cause of mass extinction on Earth? If we look at land usage, over 71% of land on Earth is converted for human use. If we look at North America, over 290 million acres are actually agriculturally converted, and places like Queensland, Australia, over 50 million vertebrates are actually killed by land clearing. So glaringly, habitat loss is the main driver of extinction on Earth, and habitat loss has a few subcategories and a few effects. One of the main things that we want to focus on is habitat fragmentation and also its effect on global biodiversity. So environmental fragmentation is actually a very simple concept to understand. If you have like a USA ecosystem, you have like a cat right here, and it's living across these 3 sticky notes, and then all of a sudden you decide to have like an oil drilling operation, like drive through the center of it. Now you fragment into like this 1 section and this 2 section. So if we take this concept and actually look at the real US, we can see like we have this circle, this circle, this circle, and none of these protected areas are actually connected to each other. So when we have like migratory species, or when we have species that just move around and need space to graze, they cannot, because it's being affected by human interfacing in the surrounding areas. So what this effectively perpetuates is smaller animal populations, and it basically disturbs local biological cycles. So a really good example of real world effects of fragmentation are actually this like crazy study I found in this journal. It has like this crazy subset of data, which is really hard to understand. But basically, woodland birds are a species of migratory birds that do not like to travel across big expanses of land. So when their ecosystems are fragmented by large expanses of human activity, they actually have a tendency to not migrate as much. And what this causes is a low dispersal of these woodland birds in their natural habitats, and it also kind of disrupts the gene flow. This study found a negative correlation to gene flow among this species due to fragmentation. So another really important thing to talk about is actually biodiversity. Biodiversity is essentially the variety of life in a given ecosystem, and it's probably one of the most important factors in how healthy an ecosystem actually is. Every day, humans actually use 40,000 different species of animal, and basically habitat loss and fragmentation have a huge effect on biodiversity. Fragmentation creates a carrying capacity for specific populations of animals, and habitat loss directly kills off animals as well as changes the behavioral patterns in an ecosystem. So basically, how do we fix this? So the solution here is actually very simple, and it's just to allocate more protected land to endangered ecosystems and very sensitive areas. By allowing an ecosystem to readjust to anthropogenic changes, it will naturally reset itself. Animals will naturally change, biodiversity will naturally grow if given the space. The problem is that we are not giving these ecosystems the correct space, and we are rapidly changing areas of sustained growth. And a project that I found really interesting, if you search conservation projects, you'll find protected land management projects all across the world. One of them was actually a Haitian project, because it proves that a poor developing province can actually conserve its ecosystem. In Haiti, the Haitian Global Wildlife Conservation Project, in tandem with the Haitian government, was actually able to secure over 1,200 acres of the Grand Bois Forest habitat. In this habitat, over 68 different species actually live there, many of whom are endangered and are now protected by the sanctioned off land. So in the U.S., the federal government owns about 640 million acres of land, or 28% of the total United States land. The distribution of this federal land is delegated to 4 main agencies. If you think of one of these water bottles being one of the agencies, the water is proportional to the amount of land it owns. So essentially you have the Bureau of Land Management with the most, the U.S. Forest Service with the second most, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with the third most, and the National Park Service with the fourth most. So in total, while the U.S. might not be number one in tertiary protected area as a percentage of the total area of the country, the U.S. actually does have 275 million acres of protected land, and that basically renders the U.S. one of the top countries in protected land area. One of the largest expanses of protected land in the U.S. is I'm not even going to try to say that name, never mind. And it's a marine national monument. It measures over 139,787 square miles, which is just huge. It's home to over 7,000 different species, 1,700 which are endemic to Hawaii, and it also protects 22 other endangered species. So I recently went to Moab, Utah in order to see some of the national parks over there. I went and saw Canyonlands, I went and saw Arches, and one thing that really struck out to me about this specific national park is when you look around you, you see no humans. I mean, you see cars and you see tourists and stuff, but you look around, you can't even see a city on the horizon. I mean, you can see the Rocky Mountains, but you can't see Grand Junction, you can't see any of the nearby cities. It's just a massive expanse of non-modified by human land. I mean, Canyonlands, Utah is by no means a pristine environment. However, there's not many places in the world where you can look around you and see no human interaction with the land. So I guess this is the beauty of the federal land management system in America. I mean, there's no other country where you can really see this massive expanse of land, 20 minutes outside of Moab. Canyonlands, Utah is a national park, obviously, but prior to its designation as a national park by Congress, it actually wasn't protected by the BLM. Lots of the agricultural lobbyists in the area wanted the land for human development. So I actually spoke to former U.S. Representative running candidate Ken Lee Brunsdale about why Canyonlands is protected if it's not protected by the BLM. It's actually protected by this bill in Utah called H.R. 1500. It establishes interim protection through the BLM agency. Basically, the BLM gets funding in Utah from Utah State Congress. So Brunsdale actually tells me this. They told the BLM, if you disqualify these lands by allowing roads to be built on them or by allowing development to occur, you'll be in trouble with us and your budget comes from us. So this bill kind of demonstrates the biased delegation process of the Federal Land Management Agency, and it also kind of represents a battle between human commerciality and environmental preservation in the U.S. specifically. On the other hand, positively, this also represents, this is a beautiful country and we have lots of beautiful opportunities to preserve the land. After discussing some of the successes and failures of federal land management in America, it's kind of important to talk about some of the detectable trends within management in America. One of these trends is actually practical conservation versus political conservation. What I mean by this is that sometimes management agencies will protect land for the sake of protecting land. Sometimes there will be a practical purpose and some sort of intent behind the conservation practice. So according to researchers at the Raincoat Conservation Foundation and the University of Victoria, only 26% of conserved land in the U.S. has a measurable objective. So this can be extremely problematic because arbitrary allocation of protected land can lead to habitat fragmentation, and it can be super unhelpful when preserving biodiversity. When looking at a map of all the protected areas in the U.S., like we did in the beginning of the video, you can be seeing that none of the large expansive protected areas are even connected with each other. The American land management agencies have fragmented North American ecosystems, and they've attempted to protect North American ecosystems without a clear strategy. In order to actually rectify these mistakes, lots of private organizations actually conduct their own investigations into specific habitats that are endangered and specific zones that are actually protected by the U.S. federal government. An example of one of these private organizations actually lobbying the government was for the Center of Biological Diversity. They ran a successful campaign that persuaded the Forest Service to halt human development of the Grand Canyon southern entrance. If the Forest Service was to actually let human development of the southern entrance happen, the development would have resulted in the massive depletion of aquifers that are vital in stimulating and sustaining plant life in the Grand Canyon springs. So, by privatizing conservation efforts, organizations have actually been able to circumvent bureaucratic challenges and have been able to fund private scientific research on endangered habitats. Ultimately, the United States needs to reassess how big of a crisis this mass extinction rate actually is. And we have taken steps to actually mitigate this crisis. There are 300 million acres of protected land in the U.S., and that's a very important step into improving our impact. However, we still haven't dealt with the massive habitat loss in America as well as habitat fragmentation. At the end of the day, I want to leave this video essay with a quote from Wallace Stegner that kind of encompasses this entire idea of nature conservation and the importance of our future.
Something will have gone out of us as a people if we ever let the remaining wilderness be destroyed, if we permit the last virgin forest to be turned into comic books and plastic cigarette cases, if we drive the few remaining members of the wild species into zoos or to extinction, if we pollute the last clear air and dirty the last clean streams and push our paved roads through the last of the silence, so that never again will Americans be free in their own country from the noise, the exhausts, the stinks of human and automotive waste.